Take the North and never give it back.
So that's a good pick. You get the corner. I gotta go bold, right? I gotta go bold for this.
Yeah, she's got some nice long
Welcome back to the Unbearable Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron. Make sure to like and subscribe if you are out there on YouTube. And also for all my podcast people, make sure to rate 5 stars everywhere that you get your podcast. Just search for Unbearable Sports. What's going on, everybody? We are going to be going through our data deep dive today about the Bears versus the Colts and kind of break down some interesting stats not a lot of people like to go through. So really kind of dive down into what does the data say. Now, yesterday we were able to watch the Bears, the entire offense. We had an absolute great time going through the All 22. If you haven't already watched it, it's only out there on YouTube because it's like 3.5 hours long of us breaking down the film. But it was great. So even if you only listen audio only, check it out if you just kind of want to see us breaking down some film. But also today I will talk a little bit about that so you don't have to watch all 3.5 hours. So we'll kind of break it down a little bit as we kind of go through some of these stats, because a lot of the advanced analytics that we're going to talk about today kind of back up what we saw, because obviously it's the same exact game that we're seeing out there. So let's kind of go through this like we always do. We'll kind of go through, talk about some of the top grades, worst grades, dive into Caleb Williams, talk about the running game, receiving, O-line, D-line, and last but not least, break down the coverage. But I actually don't want to start out with the top and bottom grades first. I actually want to specifically talk about Caleb Williams first. Just go straight into that, because when we talk about Caleb Williams, well, actually, before we go into that, let's talk about just overall grades for the Chicago Bears, just to kind of see what people thought, where they thought the Bears ultimately ended up. And PFF dropped us 3 spots on our overall down to 23, kept us at 30th for the offense, dropped us 4 spots on the defense, and then 16th on special teams. Those are also graded on their actual grades. So that's what ultimately ended up happening. I agree, the defense didn't play as well. That's why you see the drops. But also at DVOA, they actually dropped us to the worst offense, which I thought was surprising. Now 8th defense and 9th special teams. But the people that liked us, I guess, was ESPN. Now, even though that our efficiency numbers, we went down 5 spots, they actually moved us up on offense one spot, and ESPN's FPI Football Power Index moved us up from 21 to 20. So there we go. And also the number 1 defense according to ESPN's Football Power Index. So you know what? I'll take it, because it wasn't pretty, but still, you know, I think that you see it in other spots. They're kind of just, originally the Bears were always a middle tier team because of the offense. You're seeing us kind of get dragged down. And this defense, I still don't think it's like the top 1 or 2, but it's still a really good like top 10 defense that you can easily call it a top 10 defense. So let's talk a little bit about Caleb Williams, where Caleb Williams had his best game. When we were watching the tape, that was something that really stuck out. He was making some good throws, and also, like, yeah, there was a couple of those where you're like, okay, was that an option route? What happened there? But ultimately, watching the tape, I came away very impressed, very encouraged with what I saw. And you look at the advanced metrics, it tells a very similar story, where 2.9 EPA, so we're finally in the green with EPA, and he was the 17th highest EPA quarterback out of 32, and he's just continued to see that. 2.0 pass EPA, which was 21st, which is great to see because we were always 30th, 31st. Now we're kind of middle of the road. We'll take that. We'll take that all day. So it's showing, he's showing progress. But you also look at the other numbers. The way that he threw was slightly different than he has been throwing in the past. We saw normally it was getting the ball out quick, getting the ball out in short yards. But what we saw, 2.82 time to throw, which was the 10th longest of last week, and also 7 air yards per completion, which was the 7th longest. Normally it's always been 3rd shortest, 4th shortest. Now we were trying to air it out, and we were actually starting to see those deep balls actually be completed. And his also average intended air yards was the 3rd longest at 10.2. So Bears trying to take more stabs downfield. And also he was able to complete more of those as well. But also the big stat that we've always kind of talked about, because he's always been in the negative and one of the worst at this, completion percentage above expected. That was around league average at 0.6. Yet again, 0 is expected. So 0.6 in the green just really echoes what we saw out there on tape. Just he was throwing better. There's plenty of room and space for him to get better. But last game that we saw, better game from him overall. Stats back it up as well. But when you also look at some of his other passing metrics, we did see him finally start to complete some passes deep. He really has not been good throwing the ball deep, and he finally completed 3 passes deep. One was a Hail Mary, but the other 2 were to the deep left, 20 to 30 yards. He had 20 plus yards. He had 2 of 5, 74 yards, and 1 interception. So that was the big piece. But in that 0 to 10 yards, we started to see that ball really come out. And you really look at it, only 2 incompletions at that 0 to 10 yard range. Really, really efficient with that. One of those of which was an interception to the left. But when we were watching the tape, he just should have gotten the ball out a little bit quicker. He hesitated, threw it, and ultimately that ended up in the turnover. But also, too, we saw him he was under pressure on 23.2% of the snaps. So the offensive line holding up better than expected, or better than last week. And also the tape kind of proved that as well. But also was not blitzed that much against the Colts, which was kind of surprising. But hey, I'll take it. But even then, PFF gave him a higher grade when he was blitzed, when he wasn't. So 55.3 grade when not blitzed, and then 67 grade when blitzed. So good game. Good game overall. Just well played. But also 14 play action snaps last game as well, which was pretty darn high. 69.6 was his offensive grade when he was taking those play action snaps, but a 53.2 when no play action was involved. But also, too, when looking from NFL Reference, what they have out there is the Bears, fun fact, 12th most play action calls, so kind of around that league average. Also 20th most RPOs with 4. And if you're curious about who kind of runs the most RPOs, Kyler, Anthony Richardson, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, a lot of those running quarterbacks running those RPOs, all of which have over 11 such snaps at the with RPOs. So, Caleb, all that you can say, getting better. Metrics back it up. Everything is getting better. And, it was very promising what we saw. Hopefully you can just kind of continue that going over to the Rams. But let's talk a little bit about the running, because I got to break this down. The running game. The big talk of when we were breaking down the film, DeAndre Swift did not look good. Now, there was a couple snaps, don't get me wrong, that were like, okay, he did his best. And honestly, he had some pretty good plays. But what we know about him is that he plays well in space. Why? Because he moves. And overall, this year, he is the second least efficient runner, according to NFL Next Gen Stats, which yet again, the efficiency metric more so shows how much are you moving around just to get a couple little yards. That's what he does, east-west. And we saw that as, while compared to Roschon Johnson, no nonsense guy. He runs. He gets the ball, he goes. And, Swift, more so kind of where should he kind of more dancing. But last week, he was the worst in the efficiency grade at 11.03. So what that means, dances a lot. And yes, he had a negative carry, that speed option. This also factors that in. So the efficiency grade is when he's dancing, when he's doing more of that dancing stuff. But also, too, all this to say as well, he also, yet again, is still top 10 in the facing the lightest boxes. Last week, he had the 7th lightest looks, which was 15.38% of 8 defenders in the box. So yet again, not a lot of people loading the box. Tape obviously backs that up because literally they watch the same tape as we do. But also overall, he has faced the 6th lightest amount of boxes in the entire NFL this entire season. So they're not, they aren't loading the box and stopping the run. They're just playing too high. They're playing normal too high, and that's what they're doing. They're not they're daring us to more so pass the ball than to run the ball, which is sad. But also he's had the sixth most time behind the line of scrimmage at 2.9. That also is the same as his entire season. But also, this is the big stat. The rush yards over expected per attempt. Like we said, actually, I didn't say this on the show last episode. The worst at rushing yards over expected last year was Jamal Williams at negative 0.98. Kareem Hunt was second at negative 0.75. Keep in mind that those are the two worst last season. DeAndre Swift last week, negative 2.28 rush yards over expected per attempt. So that's them saying you should be getting 2 more yards, at least 2 more yards than what you are getting when the ball is in your hands. And when we watch the tape, there was a handful of times that we go, he should have probably taken that hole. He should have just ran. He also he could have been able to kind of go through this or that. We were critical of Swift when we were watching the tape. And the numbers back it up. The analytics nerds, they back us up with this as well. And he's still the worst for rush yards over expected. And I think last week it was around, or the week before this, and week 2, he was around -4. So it just continues to show, put in Roschon Johnson. Because Roschon, no nonsense type of a guy. Unfortunately with Swift, it's just not working out. With this offense, it does not look good. He still is explosive. Well, like when the ball's in his hands and you get it out to him in the screen, you see the quickness, you see the agility. It's just when he's running with the football in it, contested at the line of scrimmage, he's just not making the right decisions, and it's just not good. It's, yet again, not good. But actually, speaking of just not good, let's actually go through some of the top and worst graded players according to PFF. I always like to load these just because, I know people hate on PFF. They're the only people out there that are actually giving out grades like this. So I got to give them some kudos, but we'll talk about some that I agree with, some that I don't agree with. But let's just start about the highest graded offensive players. Number 1, Cole Kmet at 86. And I agree. When we were watching him, we talked about the sack that was given up. But then when we actually put on the tape, what we noticed was he kind of got messed up by Mercedes, because Mercedes thought that a corner was going to be coming in. It looked like the slot corner was kind of just chilling on the outside, and they ran some of those blitzes where the corner just kind of sits right in front of him and is like, I'm going to blitz. I'm going to blitz soon. So Mercedes passes off the Latu over to Kmet, and kind of also screws over Kmet, runs right around Kmet, gets the sack. So I think that what PFF is doing here is not completely blaming him for that sack, but also too, Cole Kmet was running good routes. He was also breaking tackles. He was doing well. So I agree with the grade of 86. Very good game. And also the aforementioned Roschon Johnson, 75 grade, which was the second highest to Cole Kmet. Like we said, Roschon Johnson blocked well. There was a beautiful run pass blocking snap that we really liked, but also just the running grade, 74.7, above average for that. Just good game. Roschon Johnson played very well. He was able to break through some arm tackles, found the right holes. Yet again, a no-nonsense runner. Is he going to give you these big splashy plays? No, but we don't need splashy plays. We just need a run game. So Roschon, great, really good game. Then also, when we were watching the line, Darnell Wright and Braxton Jones seemed very similar. But like we were joking about it when we were watching the tape, Braxton was definitely getting pushed back more, and Darnell was also getting pushed back, but I would say Darnell would get beat. Like someone would go around him more than Braxton, but Braxton would be pushed straight back into the quarterback more. So I'm actually a little bit surprised at how high they are graded at 69.6, but still, I thought that they were your best offensive linemen out there, and they played a solid game. Would I grade them that high? Probably not. But this is what I said also out there too, is that I think PFF doesn't mind if the person gets pushed back, because they're technically not losing the rep. They're getting pushed back into the quarterback. So I think that's where the hot debate is. If you get pushed back, but you're not they're not causing the sack, the person's not getting sacked, is that bad, right? To what extent is that bad? So I think that's the big question. That's the big debate when you look at a stat like this and you look at a grade like this. This is where you put the tape and the grade, and then we can explain a lot better. It's good to know both sides of the coin. But then next, Rome Odunze, 68.9 grade. Rome looked good out there. Really enjoyed what we saw, and he was getting open. He was really getting open, really turning on the Jets, made some good catches. Rome, very good. So those were the top 5 that I wanted to call out. And when we talk about the bottom, we did bottom 10 because there was a lot of people that weren't great out there. Mercedes Lewis, some of the blocks were bad. I think that this is a little brutal. Maybe it's because they just don't like his receiving game, but he had the worst grade. Gerald Everett had the next. Gerald Everett missed a lot of blocks, did not look great out there. DeAndre Swift, like we said, not a great game, 51 grade. But yet again, this does kind of echo what we saw. DeAndre Carter, not a great game at receiver. Didn't know that Tyler Scott was out there. We missed those 2 plays that he was out there. But Khalil Herbert, I mean, he only had 9 snaps. But then Coleman Shelton, yeah, not a great game for Coleman Shelton and Tevin Jenkins. I both agree with that. And Caleb, a 57 grade, which is his best. Yet again, there's still some stuff to get better at. I thought 57 was a little harsh, but at the same time, when you see about what it is, slightly below average, keep in mind PFF's 60 is average. So 57, slightly below average. And Tevin Jenkins, I thought this was odd. His run block grade was 40.8, pass block grade of 87.9. I said this during the show. I wasn't a big fan of what we were seeing out of Tevin Jenkins. The only thing that I thought Matt Pryor should be out in this worst of the worst. He was someone that we really didn't like with the tape. He was a little slow getting out there, but yet again, it's trying to get to that next level. Just wasn't able to do a lot of that. I wasn't a big fan of what Pryor did. So, but yeah, it was really that interior that I didn't love with it. But yeah, I thought that that's where just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the grades, because it's fun to just kind of say, what did the grades look like? But if we go over to the receivers, how did the receivers do? This is always a little tough. When you look at the average separation that they get, this is at the point of catching the football. But what I really wanted to highlight is just how important Cole Kmet is to this offense. I think for PFF, he's the 5th highest graded tight end in the NFL. Cole Kmet, 4.6 yards of separation at the point of catching the football. That is great. And that's what you want out of your rookie quarterback. And I think a big reason why they were doing so great was we saw this on tape. He was taking these plays where Cole Kmet was able to sit down in zone coverage and he was able to throw it to him. And it's those easy catches that, yes, you could maybe fish for something larger, but take this stuff that's given to you. If you take the stuff that's given to you, that's what Brady does. That's what Mahomes does. When I look at these average completed air yards, Mahomes is actually typically one of the shortest throwers. I think people think that because he's got this huge arm, he's bombing it deep. He's not. This year, at least, he's not bombing it deep. He has some of the smallest, average air completed yards. So Cole Kmet, want to see him continuously getting included in this offense because he is a weapon, he is good, and he's just a reliable target to be thrown to. So I really wanted to highlight that. Rome Odunze at 2.3 separation. Yet again, this is where you look at the grades, you look at the tape, you look at this stat and you go, Rome's not creating any separation. Well, when you see it, it's when the ball's thrown to him, he was a lot of times in tighter coverage because the way that the ball was being thrown to him, it was more of a schemed up look and it just flat out didn't work. But also his touchdown grab, phenomenal move by Rome Odunze, good game overall. And DJ Moore, solid game from him as well. But let's go over to this offensive line where I want to kind of see what some of the grades we're kind of calling out with this offensive line. Like we said, Matt Pryor had a higher grade than I would have given him at 65.6. I think he was probably a little bit lower. I would put him lower than Coleman Shelton and Tevin Jenkins. But when you look at this, Darnell Wright and Braxton Jones actually had bad pass block efficiency ratings at 95.5 for Darnell Wright and 97.2 for Braxton Jones. And that's where there's the difference between pass block efficiency and also the actual true grade, where PFF is saying, hey, they gave up, Darnell gave up 4 pressures and Braxton gave up 3. And when you put on the tape, yeah, they gave up pressures. That's why I found it very odd that they had that high of grades out there. But you continuously look at some of the efficiency metrics. Coleman Shelton gave up 4 pressures, not good. Matt Pryor gave up 2. Yet again, I felt like Pryor could have given up a little bit more. I did not like what we saw out of him. And Tevin Jenkins gave up 1. But Tevin, there's this like lostness when you see him out there. But yet again, when he gets his hands on you, it's good. But he looks a little lost out there too. So that interior still got to get better. The tackles kind of pushing back a little bit from that offensive line perspective. But let's go over to the defense, where on the defensive line, we saw this defensive line not play as well as they typically do. You saw a lot of their win rates essentially drop. So last week, Gervon Dexter, 5% win rate according to PFF. Walker with a 5% win rate. Sweat around with a 5% win rate. Billings with an 8.3% win rate. You really didn't see this defensive line win as much as they typically have. Yet again, good offensive line for the Colts. They had our number and wasn't as dominant as expected. Do I think that we should panic? No, I don't think that there's any room to really panic about the defensive line. They're still a very good unit. And when you look at the defensive line overall, let's just see this other piece. If we're looking at ESPN's pass rush win rate, they still have Andrew Billings as the number 3 defensive tackle in pass rush win rate at 21%, and Gervon Dexter at 6 with 17%. They officially took DeMarcus Walker off of the defensive tackle list and moved him to defensive end. So that's why you don't hear him being on the top 2 or anything like that anymore. But if you also go out to, let me just find this, some other win rates. Darrell Taylor is now 4th with a 30% pass rush win rate, but Montez Sweat finally breaks the list at number 20 of ESPN's pass rush win rate at 20. And these are all win rates for the entire season. Something that I also found interesting too, Montez Sweat with a 12% double team rate. So Montez Sweat, according to ESPN and Advanced Analytics, not being double teamed as much as expected. But also DeMarcus Walker showing up at number 10 for run stop rate for defensive ends at 33%. So yet again, DeMarcus Walker doing good things. I think that Montez Sweat is still playing well. He's just, yet again, regressing back to the mean. He's not an elite defensive end in the league. He's a great defensive end in this league. And I think that's where you're seeing just the natural regression to his game to what he is. He's a very good defensive end for us. And that's fine. That's fine. So he's playing well. The line's playing well. Just last week, not what we were typical of seeing. And also, when you look at the highest graded players for the defense, it also echoes that as well. Highest graded player for the defense was Jack Sanborn on, I think, only like 7 snaps. Then Kevin Byard had a great game at safety. Austin Booker had a good spot coming in with relief. Tremaine Edmonds continues to grade well for PFF this year, which is great to see after paying all this money to him. Stevenson had a good grade, and also Jalen Johnson above average grade. But if you go over to the worst graded defenders, you have TJ Edwards out there at 29.9. TJ Edwards not having the same season that he did last season. But then you also see Kyler Gordon out there. They really hated on his coverage. Andrew Billings also made that list. Like we said, defensive line, not as great as we typically saw. Sweat's on there. DeMarcus Walker's out there. Darrell Taylor's out there, and Billings. Yet again, these are the stats from these are the grades from last week, not on the entire season. So it echoes what we saw. Just defensive line, not as dominant as they typically were. They faced a good offensive line. That's it, right? No concern. We've already seen 2 great weeks of them. Last week was difficult with the matchup that they had. And also Jaquan Brisker, 51.2 grade. So anytime that I see Brisker out there, I just assume that he's overcommitting to something. Just because that's the type of player he is. But that's why I love him. But then last little bit, speaking of just coverage, when you look at the coverage grades, this is where PFF's coverage grades are different than the actual target and receptions. Because yet again, it's that whole meme of, you know how like a defender where someone will overthrow the pass and then the defensive back will start celebrating. Perfect example with Kyler Gordon. Kyler Gordon only allowed 33% of his passes to be completed. But yet again, is he breaking those up, or is it just Anthony Richardson missing the guy? Or is he just not on his guy correctly? So this is something that I wish we were able to kind of grind the tape on the defense altogether, so we could have kind of gone through this and see like, why is TJ Edwards and Kyler Gordon sub 30 when it came down to coverage? But ultimately, they did not like the way that those two in particular played in coverage. Everyone else, Kevin Byard, 76.3, Tyreek, Jalen Johnson, Tremaine Edmonds, all in the 60s, and Jaquan Brisker in the 53 grade. So overall, they're saying that Edwards and Gordon were more so the people that were getting picked on out there in coverage. But yet again, how much concern? I'd like to see Edwards get a little bit better and kind of step his game up like we've seen before, but still not a lot of concern. We know that Gordon's going to be flying around there, and same thing with TJ Edwards. So that's overall like what we have out there. Defense is always a little difficult to do with some of those advanced metrics. Only other piece I just want to throw out there, I heard this little nugget that the Bears have completed. This has been buzzing around on Twitter, but 5 of their 59 second down plays for the Bears offense, 5 of their 59 second down plays resulted in first downs, which is 8.5, which is a big reason why when we were watching the tape, they had like 89 snaps, because they never get the first down on second down, which is huge. You know, now all the pressure's on Caleb. And like we said this, there's so much pressure on Caleb. But hey, he's getting better. We saw the progression. It's all good things. And hopefully we can pull off a win next. But if you're out there listening, make sure to like and subscribe out there on YouTube. Rate the show 5 stars everywhere that you get your podcast. We'll be previewing the Rams over the next 2 days, so make sure to stay tuned. And with that, Unbearable Sports Podcast, we are out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a